Heilige Shabbat, na 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 na, ya na 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 na, na na na, Heilige Shabbat. Heilige Shabbat, tini na 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 no, tini na 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 no, hey na 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 boy, na na na, Heilige Shabbat, na 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 na, Heilige Shabbat, na 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 na. Heilige Shabbat, na 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 na, Heilige Shabbat.
Shalom, my dear friends. Shalom today, the 18th day of the month of Sivan, 18 Yud Chet Chai, the vitality of Sivan, corresponding to the 11th of June of the year 2017. And we have a more glorious studies today in the very climax of Sefer Iyov, the book of Job, as well as continuing in our Mishnah Shabbat. So without further ado, let us turn to our study of Sefer Iyov, chapter 38. Shalom. Today, the 18th day of the month of Sivan of the year 5777, corresponding to the 11th of June of the year 2017. We continue now in Sefer Iyov, Book of Job, chapter 38, picking up from where we left off in our previous session, where we had reached the end of verse 23, speaking about the hail that God holds in reserve and held in reserve to overthrow Egypt in the plague of the hail, and also is held in reserve for God's war against Gog and Magog in the future. So we continue in these verses until nearly the end of the present chapter, chapter 38, which continues to deal with God's questions to Job on matters relating to the elemental forces of nature, to the creation of the heavens and the earth and the elements, the winds and the clouds and the rains. And this continues and goes on until almost the end of chapter 38. For some reason that is, to me, unexplained, there is a change in theme from verses 38 onwards of this chapter and into chapter 39, because whereas until that point we continue to be speaking about the elemental forces of nature, from that point on it begins to speak about God's providence over the different species of animals, which will lead up to the great climax afterwards of the depiction of Leviathan, the Leviathan, and Behemoth, the monstrous beast, as we were discussing in relation to the later chapters. But now let us continue on in chapter 38 until we reach the point where the subject shifts in verse 39 of this chapter to the different species of animals. So continuing then on from verse 24, after having heard about the hail that God holds in reserve, verse 24, Eize haderech yecholek or yofetz kodim ale oretz. Eize haderech, which is this path, this road, yecholek or, that the light becomes split. Yofetz kodim, it splinters and scatters the kodim, the eastern light, the light coming up from the east, alei oretz, over the earth. As the sun is rising up in the morning over the eastern horizon, the light becomes split before even the sun appears over the horizon, and the light spreads out in all from the east to the north and the south. Mipilag lashetef te'olo v'derech lachaziz kolot. Mipilag, who has divided, lashetef, to the driving rains or the flowing waters, te'ola, a path, v'derech, who has divided and split a derech, a path, a road, lachaziz kolos, for the chaziz, a word for the cloud of kolot, of thunderous voices. That is the more obvious pshat on this verse, which is speaking about the celestial forces and the elements of nature. The midrashic explanation of this verse, verse 25, is brought by Rashi, who says that in Arabia they call the ahir shitofo. Shitofo here, that would be the Aramaic form of the word shetef, which would be something that flows forth, and the ta'alor would be the gumo, the cavity from which the growing hair draws its nourishment. And each of these hairs has to come forth from the skin from a different pathway, because if there were two hairs that were drawing nourishment from the same cavity, they would darken the eyes of a person. And if God makes no mistake about one source of the vitality of one hair and the source of the vitality of another hair, God certainly made no mistake between Iyov, Job, and Oyev, the enemy. And Rashi harks back to the opening verse of the chapter, verse 1, when God speaks to Job out of the se'ara, which, as we said, not only has connotation of the storm wind, but also of a se'ara, a hair. So that is the midrashic explanation of verse 25. And in either way that we interpret this, and of course each verse has these many different overtones, either way we're talking about the unique providence that is exercised over every raindrop and over every hair that comes forth from every single body, the unfathomable providence over every detail of creation. Verse 26, continuing the theme of the paths of the clouds and the thunder through the sky, Lehamtir al eretz lo ish, midbor lo odom bo. Lahamtir, to cause the rain to fall down, al eretz lo ish, upon a land that there is no man there, midbor lo odam bo, a wilderness where there is no Adam, no human there. We are often so self-centered as humans that we think that everything must go around ourselves. We forget that there are other levels of creation that are nourished by the waters that fall, where there are no inhabitants and no people. And perhaps another overtone of this verse in relation to the words of Elihu ben Barachel to Job in the previous chapters is that Elihu had said to Job that sometimes God causes the rain to fall in the merit of a righteous person that prays for those rains. And here the verse says that God will even extend his providence over a land, Lo-ish, where there is a land where there's no man of stature to pray. Midbor, an area where the people are given the faculty of speech, but lo odam bo, there's no Adam, there's no true righteous Adam that has the power to exploit the power of speech to bring down the rains. Yet God, in his inscrutable providence, brings down the rains everywhere. Lahasbia sho'o sho'o ulahatzmiach motzo deshe. The remarkable beauty of nature, the waters fall, lahaspia, to give satisfaction to the sho'o sho'o, a doubled expression of thick darkness where the rains may fall, and yet the effect of these rains in that intense darkness will be ulahatzmiach, to sprout forth, moitzo deshe, the coming forth of deshe, of green herbage. So having described the wonders of creation, now God challenges Job with yet another of the series of questions. Verse 28, Hayesh lamotor ov, o mi holid eglei tol. Hayesh lamotor ov. Is there indeed for rain a father? Mi holid eglei tol. Who has given birth to the galei, the little jewels, the globules of the dew? Here, part of the two basic elements of God's providence over nature and over the growth of plants and herbs everywhere is the rain, which is considered to be a masculine force that is coming down to lie upon the female receiving earth to breed the children, and these also come forth from the level of yesh, of wisdom, which is alluded to also in the word av. So here we're talking about the male element in verse 28. From verse 29 we go into the female element. Mi beten mi yotzo akorach, uchefor shomayim mi yolodo. Mi beten mi, from the womb of whom. Again, an allusion to Bina, understanding, God's attribute of Bina in the creation, as opposed to the previous verse speaking about Av, the Father, wisdom. Mi beten mi, from the womb of whom Yotzo HaKorach, did come forth the Kerach, the ice. Uchfor Shomayim mi Yolodo, the Chfor, the frost of the heavens. Who has given birth to it? Again, these questions about the source of the yesh of the universe. Where is the hidden source of ayin, the nothingness out of which the yesh comes into existence? Verse 30, Ko'even mayim yischabou, ufnei sehom yislakodu. Ke'even, like a stone, mayim yishabou, the waters will disappear. In other words, the waters are hidden under what looks like a stone, which is the ice that forms above the waters. Ufnei sehom, the face of the deep, yislakodu, are held in a trap. They are held together as one. They cannot move because of the layers of ice above them. Again, a reference to the providence of God over the water economy through its freezing and then unfreezing, this constant cycling. And now moving upwards to the heavens indeed, to the constellations in verse 31, God addressing Job from the whirlwind, the puny immortal. Look up at the heavens, look up at the skies, gaze up. Haskasher ma'adanos kimo, o moshechos kesil tefateach. Haskasher, another question, do you bind up ma'adanot kimo, the belts of the Kimo constellation, translated as the Pleiades, or Moshchos Kesil, or is it you that the Moshchos, that is the straps, the straps of a purse, which when they're opened, the contents of the purse will fall out. The Ksil is the Orion constellation, and the allusion here is not only to the shapes of these constellations, but to their effects in nature, which had been the theme of the previous verses about the waters, because these two constellations in particular are considered to have an effect upon our climate and weather. Says Rashi on verse 31, speaking about the belts of the Kimo, Pleiades constellation, Kishur Kimo, the binding together of Kimo, the binding of this constellation up, Shelo teitze kol korisov v'yachriv es ha'olam betzino, so that not all of its chilling, freezing bands of influence should go forth and to destroy the entire world through freezing. And then the second part of the verse, O moishchis ksil tevatach, do you open the straps of the Orion constellation to bring forth the sun to cool down the chill of the Pleiades constellation. Then going on into verse 32, Hasuitzi mazorois beito va'ayish al boneho sanchim. Hasuitzi mazorois. Is it you that bring forth the mazorois? The Meforshim say this is like mazalot, the constellations. Each of the constellations, each one in its proper time. Va'ayish, the bear constellation. Alboneho sancheim, do you lead her and comfort the bear constellation over her children? Well, this verse is explained interestingly in the Midrash brought by Rashi on this verse 32, where Rashi says the word mazarot refers to all of the other mazalot, the other constellations, and the Ayish, says Rashi, this is Kochav Gadol Shebekimo. This is a large star that is in the constellation of Kimo, the Pleiades mentioned in the previous verse. There are many other stars fixed in it. God took out two of those stars from that constellation in order to open up the windows of the heavens at the time of the flood. And at that time, those two stars were fixed in the constellation of the Taleh, the Aries. And God is destined to return those two stars to her. That is a midrash in the Tanchuma. Well, these are mysterious allusions to the influence of the stars and the planets over the earth. And this idea is continued further in verse 33. Hayodato chukois shomoim im tosim mishtoro v'oretz. Do you know the laws of the heavens? Or is it you that puts its control, its regime upon the earth? Well, here this verse would be explained as referring to the influence of the celestial system on the earth. Shomayim, the heavens, Kabbalistically would allude to Zeir Anpin, the male influencing source of the flows of blessing into the creation. And the heavens have their laws. These are the laws and the midot, the attributes through which Zeir Anpin, the face of, known as the small face, is sending down blessing from the heaven down to the earth. The mishtaro is the mishtar, the regimen of the heavens, of Zeir Anpin, bo'oretz, on the earth, in the material world, which is the malchut, the receiving Malchut Sfirah. So here we have an allusion to the way that the heavenly stars and constellations influence the growth of the creations on the earth, and this point is brought out in a midrash where it is said that there is not a single plant on earth that does not have a star that is telling it to grow. The word mishtar has the concept, has the connotation of a shoter, a policeman who rules with a rod or a club or some item of force, and the angel strikes, as it were, the plant and tells it to grow. So again, these depictions of the power of God over all the details of creation. Verse 34, Hasorim lo'ov kolecho, v'shif'as mayim techaseko. Hasorim lo'ov kolecho. Can you raise to the cloud your voice as God commands the cloud when to thunder, when to go forth? V'shif'as mayim techaseko, so that the shif'as mayim, the great flow of the waters, will cover you over? Do you have it in your power simply to call out to the clouds and tell them to rain down on you when you need water? Hashalach brokim v'yelechu v'yomru lecho hinenu. Shall you send forth the brakim, the flashes of lightning, v'yelechu, and they shall go, v'yomru lecho hinenu, they shall say to you, here we are. Well, the power of God's lightning, amazing. Here today, a man is trying to imitate this with laser beams, supposedly doing man's command, but it is only these elemental forces of nature that are God's angel that tell him, here we are to do your bidding. Mishos batuchois chochmo, o minosan lasechvi vino. Mishos, who is it that placed batuchois in the kidneys, chochmo, wisdom, or minosan, who is it that gave lasechvi, to the heart that sees, vino, understanding. Here the two sides of the tree of the Sfirot, the right-hand side and the left-hand side, but here they are intermingled. Mi, who, namely an allusion to bino. Mishos batuchois, down in the kidneys, they are called the tuchois because in the Torah the word tuchos appears in the portion of Metzora dealing with the plastering of a house from which stones had been removed, having leprosy, and tiach is a plaster. The kidneys are called plastered over because they are covered over by the chalev, fat that covers over the kidneys, and there deep within them is the kidneys which are associated in the Torah with counsel, whereas wisdom is in the head. A counsel is considered to be down below at the very roots of the point from which the legs, netzach and hod, are taking their movements to go places. So the wisdom comes down from the right column, brought down by bino into the tuchos, into the kidneys, netzach and hod. And then minosan lasech vivino, the attribute of Bina alluded to in the word mi is giving now Bina understanding down into the Sechvi. The Sechvi is related by our Meforshim to the root that is found in Aramaic, also found in the name of, the alternative name of Sarah, Yiska, Jessica, which is considered to come from the root of sachi, which is to see, to perceive, and the heart is said here to be perceiving with its perceptions of bina. So all of these questions are directing Job to the unfathomable sources of the phenomena of the world around us, and it's all entirely unfathomable, uncountable. Mi yisaper shechokim b'chochmo, v'nivelei shomayim mi yashkiv. The outer mashal is speaking about the heavenly phenomena. The inner mashal is highly is alluded to in all of these words. To go first with the pshat, mi yisapir shechokim, who can, sapir means to clarify, to make brilliant, like the sapphire. If it were to count, it would be mi yispor, but the saper is to make shine. The shchakim, this level of the heavens that are grinding the influence down into the world, who is clarifying them with his wisdom? V'nivlei shomayim mi yashkiv. Nivlei shomayim, the nevel is a drinking flagon containing a liquid, the nivlei shomayim. These are the flagons of the heavens, which are the clouds which are holding the waters. Mi yashkiv, who is it that sets them to lie down, the clouds, when they stand still, or if they move through the heavens? Who clears the heavens of clouds, and who brings the clouds down into the sky? Betsekes ofor lamutzok uregovim yuduboku. Betsekes, when he poured forth ofor, the earth element, lamutzok, to become solidified, uregovim, and the clods, yuduboku, would stick together. In other words, in these two verses, 37 and 38, we have a summary of the creation of the heavens and the earth. Who was it who clarified the heavens with his wisdom at the time when he poured forth the molten earth to solidify, to form the center of the material world? And with that, our verses now turn in the series of questions and challenges to Job to the mysteries of God's providence over the animals. Again, I would have thought that chapter 38 could have ended at the end of verse 38, and then you'd begin a new chapter from verse 39 of chapter 38, but it shows how often quite arbitrary and incomprehensible the decisions of those who divided the Hebrew Bible up into chapters. As you see, in fact, in the Hebrew text, there is no break between verses 38 and 39. It's a continuation of these challenges, but now turning to the mysteries of the wild beasts. Hasotzud lalovi toref, v'hayas kfirim tamale. Do you trap for the lavi, lion, its prey? Hayas kefirim tamale, can you fill the livelihood of the kefirim, of the young lion cubs? And so it goes on with so many levels of the natural world that we humans do not stop to consider most of the time. But God's providence is not over the affairs of all of us, but it's also providence over every single detail of every order of creation. So with that, we conclude for today our study of the present chapter 38, and we'll be moving in our next session, which will be this week on Wednesday, God willing, to the conclusion of chapter 38 and chapter 39, which, as I say, are a continuous whole, since they turn to the level of the animals and the beasts. So for now, we'll have a brief interval before we come to today's study of the Mishnah.
shaynu shiyosechu shayni bemitzvesechu besechekaini besoirusechu sabayni mitilechu besam shaynu shiyosechu betahayni bayni beyomdechu beyemes 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 oh betahayni bayni beyomdechu beyemes betahayni bayni beyomdechu beyemes betahayni bayni beyomdechu beyemes betahayni bayni beyomdechu beyemes shayni bemitzvesechu besechekaini besoirusechu sabayni mitilechu besam shaynu shiyosechu betahayni bayni beyomdechu beyemes 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 betahayni bayni ohoy beyomdechu beyemes betahayni bayni beyomdechu beyemes betahayni bayni ohoy beyomdechu beyemes betahayni bayni.
Shalom again, my dear friends. Shalom, and back to our studies now with turning to the Mishnah Shabbat. Shalom. Today, the 18th day of the month of Sivan of the year 5777, corresponding to the 12th of June of the year 2017. And we continue now in Mishnah Shabbat in chapter 20, where we had reached until the end of the third Mishnah, which had been speaking about, at the end of it, feeding of animals, and in the way of our Mishnah to weave together the chapters by strands relating to themes that appear in a Mishnah which carry on into the next Mishnah. We continue now with issues of the feeding of animals on the homestead, and we will be returning to the subject actually in the closing chapter of Masechet Shabbat. But for now, we're going to be dealing with some laws relating to the preparation of food for one's animals on the Shabbat. And our Mishnah tells us, beginning of Mishnah 4 in chapter 20, Perek Chof of Tractate Shabbos, Gurfin milifnei apetom. It is permitted to rake aside the waste from before the patam, the fattened animal that is being fattened up, and it's permitted to rake out the waste, the earth that has got mixed in with the food in the animal's feeding trough, so as not to cause the animal to become disgusted by the food mixed up with the earth. Umasalkin latstodin mipnei orei. It is permitted to sweep aside in the animal's route to the feeding trough, sweep aside hay so that the animal will not tread upon the feed and spoil it. All of this is permitted to do on the Shabbat. We are here on the borderlines of questions relating to muktzeh, and our Mishnah is telling us that there is no muktzeh involved in removing here the earthen waste from the animal's feeding trough or preventing the good food from getting soiled by the animal, by the animals' droppings and so on. These are permitted on the Shabbat. Now these are the words of Rabbi Doiso. Divrei Rabbi Doiso v'hachomim oisrin. However, the other sages forbid this. Now the Talmud has an interesting discussion on this dispute between Rabbi Dosa and the other sages when it comes to talking about cleaning out the evus, the trough of the animal. And in some cases the trough is actually a keli, a vessel. In other cases the trough is an area of the ground that has been cordoned off for the animal to have its food there. And according to the Talmud, everybody agrees that it will be forbidden to start raking out the trough that was actually on the ground itself. And this touches on one of the forbidden labors of the Shabbat, which is to plow your land and prepare your land. And also building involves preparing the ground, evening out the ground. And evening out the ground, for example, by smoothing out bumps in the ground, that would be a violation of one of these prohibitions, either of building or of plowing on the Shabbat. And in the case of the trough that is on the ground, everybody agrees that we cannot let the cattle farmer rake this out on the Shabbat because we have fear that he's going to start tampering with the actual base of the trough made out of the earth and would come to the prohibition of evening out the earth on the Shabbat. So the machloket, the dispute between the other sages against Rabbi Dosa, is explained in the Talmud referring only to a trough that is actually a keli, where there is no fear of the violating the prohibition against evening out the ground. And that is where Rabbi Dosi permits it, but the other sages won't even let the farmer rake out the trough that is a utensil, a keli, for fear that that would bring him to rake out a trough that was on the ground. It would come to start evening out the ground on the Shabbat. So with that, we continue now to with more laws relating to the feeding of animals on the Shabbat. Notlim mibehemo, notlim milifnei behemo zoi, v'nosim lifnei behemo zoi b'Shabbos. Permitted to take the food from that was in front of one animal, let's say a donkey, and put it in front of the ox. This is animal food, and there's no reason not to take from the donkey's food to put it before the ox. The reason is because the donkey, as it eats the food, does not soil the food. It's not actually the case the other way round, as the Talmud explains. When Balak saw the children of Israel eating up the land, he compares it to the way that an ox licks at the grass of the field, and when the ox licks, out of the mouth of the ox exude saliva, which actually soils the feed and will not make it fit for another animal. And so where the Mishnah is, in the explanation of the Talmud, permitting taking feed from one animal to another, would only be from an animal like the donkey that does not soil the food from which it's been eating to give it in front of the ox, but not vice versa. Because if the food was soiled and the other animal would not eat it, that food is no longer fit for animal consumption at all, and therefore that food comes into the category of muktzeh. Muktzeh, those items that we may not move on the Shabbat because they are not usable on the Shabbat. And that is now the theme of the coming Mishnah in this chapter and in the ensuing chapter, many laws relating to muktzeh. Mishnah 5, Akash she'al gabe hamito. If there was some straw on top of the bed, lo yenalnoi beyodoi, the person may not move this with his hand. Elomanalnoi begufo, he could only move the straw on the bed with his body, but not directly with his hand. Ve'im hoyo machol behemo, but if the straw on the bed was animal food, or shehoyo olav kar, or there was upon the bed a kar, a pillow, or sodin, or there was a sheet, menan oy biyodoi, person may shift it with his hand. The whole issue here is about the status of this straw. In the case where the Mishnah begins by telling us not to move the straw with one's hand, the straw in question is muktzeh. That is, it was not set aside before the Shabbat to serve as bedding. The straw had just been left in this place, and the person wants to bed down. Because that straw was not designated for use from before the Shabbat, it is muktzeh, and one may not move it with one's hand. In telling us elamananu begufo, but the person could shift it with his body, for example, shifting it with his elbow or his shoulder, this is called a moving which is indirect. And being indirect, where the person is doing this for his comfort, it will be permitted on the Shabbat. An indirect way of moving muktzeh where necessary for some reason on the Shabbat is permissible, as our Mishnah here is telling us. That is, if the straw in question was indeed muktzeh, it had not been designated from before the Shabbat for some purpose on the Shabbat. But if it was animal feed, in that case it is fit for use on the Shabbat, or shehoya olav kar, or there was on the straw, there was a pillow there, or sadin, a sheet, that means that the straw was indeed put there for bedding, and therefore menana biyodo, the person may actually move the straw to put it in a nice order for him to lay down on the Shabbat. So here we are introduced to important laws about muktzeh, that while something that is muktzeh may not be moved with one's hand, you cannot take it up in your hand and carry it or move it. One may, where necessary, shift it with one's body. If there was, for example, a piece of something on the floor that was muktzeh, you can kick it to the side with your foot. That is not called a regular carrying or moving on Shabbat. So moving now to the continuation of the fifth Mishnah. We now are touching on another aspect of muktzeh, as we shall see, and having to do here also with questions relating to the laundering and pressing of clothes. This Mishnah is talking about a clothes press, as was used by tailors and cleaners, and is still until today, where the garment is actually laid over a board and another heavier board is placed over, and the upper board is arranged with perforations and a mechanism for tightening the upper board against the lower board through the use of the pins in order to press the laundered garment underneath it to make it smooth and without creases. So this is called a machbesh. The Hebrew word kavish, a road, is a surface prepared for contemporary transportation through the pressing of the road with rollers, with steam rollers or other rollers in use today, and that is related to the word machbesh, which is the pressing down of the cloth with the press. Machbesh shel bali botim. If it was a press of a regular householder, matirin, it would be permissible to undo the press, the presumption being that what one would want to take the garment that had been on the press from before the Shabbat and put it on. For that reason, the machbesh shel bali botim, an amateur householder's press, it would be permissible to loosen it to take out the garment. Aval lo kofshin, but we cannot press a garment on the Shabbat. To put a garment into the press, that would be a prohibition against an offense against the prohibition against completing the tikkun of the garment, just like ironing would be to straighten out the garment. That is the makeh b'patish of the laundering process, whereby we are preparing it for the use. So all of that applies to a garment that was in the press of a regular householder. V'shel kofsin lo yiga bo. However, if it was the press of the kofsin, the professional launderers, lo yiga bo, he may not touch it, not to take out the garment, and certainly not to put in the garment. The reason is that this is a professional instrument that is tightened very tightly, according to Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, im hoyo mutor me'erev Shabbos, if the machbesh, the press of the kofsin, if that was mutor, if it had been opened up from before the Shabbos, matires kulo v'shamto, he'll be able to release the whole thing and to pull aside the garment for use on the Shabbat. That would be the view of Rabbi Yehuda. Apparently, even if it was a professional cleaner's press, nevertheless, one could do that on the Shabbat. The halacha is that it would only be permissible to remove the cloth from a householder's press. So with that, we move on to the new chapter, to chapter Chof Aleph, chapter 21, which continues with matters relating to muktzeh. Noitel Adam es benoi vo even biyodoi. A person may take his little child if there's a stone in the hand of the child. V'chalkolo vo even b'seicho, and a basket if the stone was in the basket. A stone, as we have learned, is intrinsically muktzeh. Now, if the little child had picked up a stone and is crying to the father to get picked up, not because the child is holding a stone shall we prevent the father from picking up the child. Even though the child is holding the stone, which is muktzeh, and the father will be indirectly holding the stone for the sake of placating his child, that as longing for the father may do this. Now this, notes the Baal Tanura, would be only the case in a chatzer, in a private yard, a reshus hayochid, in a private domain. The reason being that in the public domain, the father would not be able to carry the child. Now, in the case of the basket, there are a number of different aspects to what our Mishnah is telling us. What is the stone doing in this basket? If there was a basket and a stone had fallen into it that served no particular purpose, the stone is muktzeh. And the basket itself is basis, the davar asur. It is a basis, a base for davar asur, something that is forbidden to move on the Shabbat. And all the time that the forbidden item is on the base itself also may not be moved because it's serving as a base for the muktzeh item that may not be moved. However, if the stone had fallen into a basket that contained fruits that the person wanted to move from place to place on the Shabbat, not because there's a stone mixed in with those fruits shall we prevent the person from shifting his food, because the food is intrinsically edible and usable on the Shabbat. The stone is forbidden, so the basket is now basis, it's a base for something that is permitted as well as something that is forbidden. And for the sake of the fruit, we will allow the person to move the basket. Here we learn that where a person has, for example, a plate that had some edible food on it, and it also had some refuse, like the inedible pits of some olives or dates or something of the like, you may carry the plate on account of the edible food on it, even though the plate has on it the inedible pits that are now muktzeh. And likewise here in this Mishnah, where the basket is basis, a base for the edible fruits as well as for the muktzeh stone, the basket may be moved. Now, there might be another case where the stone is actually serving the basket. If the basket had a hole in it, and the stone had been inserted there to stop up the hole so that things don't fall out from the basket, then the stone is serving the basket and one would be permitted to carry the basket. Here, let us just look at the commentary on our Mishnah by Rabbi Ovadia of Bar Tanura. He says, in the case of the kalkala, the basket, or even b'seicho, when the stone is in the basket, v'hu sheyu peiros basal. To move the basket, it has to be that there's going to be fruits in the basket. She'imein boi peiros nase bosis ledover ha'asur. If there's no fruit in the basket has become a basis, a base for something that is forbidden, namely the stone. V'asur letaltelo. You cannot carry even the basket because it's the base of the muktzeh. וצריך נמי שיהיו בסויכוי פירויס שהם ישליחים באורץ ימו עשו. It has to be also that there will be in this basket fruits that if the person will throw them onto the ground, they will be spoiled. Like berries and grapes, or similar fruits that will be soiled if you pull them out. But if there were in the basket fruits like nuts and almonds, he should toss out the fruits, these nuts, which will not get spoiled. They will fall. In this way, he will not have to carry the basket with the muktzah stone in it. Even fruits that would get spoiled, like the berries and the grapes. If it were possible to move those berries and grapes to the side of the basket and to toss out the stone by itself, to throw it out, it would, in those circumstances, be forbidden to carry the basket with the stone. Our Mishnah is talking where the sides of the basket have got a hole in them, a pchas, some damage, or shuleho, or its base. The stone is now serving as a wall, where you could not use the basket without the stone. That is when the Mishnah permits a basket where the stone is in it. So we see how many separate laws applying in specified cases are drawn out to the one Mishnah by the Talmud. And to continue now with related laws of muktzeh. It would be permitted to move around teruma tameo. This is priestly teruma tithe that has become defiled through, for example, the fruits coming in contact with a dead rodent like a mouse, which causes the food to become tomeh. This teruma tameo may not be eaten. And therefore it serves no usable purpose on the Shabbat. However, our Mishnah is telling us that even this teruma tameo would be allowed to be carried ima tahora, with the pure teruma, which was undefiled, that could still be eaten by the priest. Ve'im achulin, and also with chulin, with regular people's food, non-holy food, since this is edible on the Shabbat to everybody, even though the teruma tameo is inedible, where you are carrying it with something that is edible on the Shabbat and usable on the Shabbat, is permitted to carry the defiled truma. Otherwise, if the truma tameo was by itself, it would be muktzeh on the Shabbat because it serves no purpose on the Shabbat. But again, we have the same law that where the muktzeh object is together with objects that you need and want on the Shabbat, even the muktzeh may be carried. Rabbi Yehuda adds, since we are talking about teruma, afmalin es hamedumo be'echod umeo. You may literally elevate the meduma, the mixed up teruma, the mixed up produce, be'echod umeo, 1 to 100. Here we are talking about a case where a person had their produce and they were separating the tithes from the different kinds of produce, and the Truma Gedola is 2% of the total produce. And the Truma Gedola may only be eaten by a priest. And once the Truma Gedola has been taken from the produce is on its way to becoming chulin, regular edible food to everybody. He will still have to separate the meiser of the Levite and the meiser sheni, and the Levite will have to separate Trumas Meiser. All in all, just a little over 20% of the produce goes on Truma, and Meiser about 1/5. But after that, the food is Chulin. Now, what will happen if some Truma fell back into the Chulin? If the Chulin produce had been fully rectified, but now Truma that may not be eaten by anybody except a priest on pain of death at the hands of heaven, if the Truma fell back into the pile of produce, what can we do? And our sages have given us a rule that if there were 100 fruits of some particular species, be it pomegranates or figs, and there were 100 that were chulin, that was produce that had been rectified through the separation of the tithes, and somebody mistakenly lets a truma pomegranate fall into the box. If there are 101 a total of fruits with the truma, it is permitted to pick out one of them, which may or may not be the one that fell in, and that one that is picked out is given to the priest as his truma, and the remains in the box are chulin. That is what our Mishnah is talking about. Rabbi Yehuda is saying, af malin es meduma. One could lift up the meduma. The meduma is there is a biblical root in the of dema, which refers to the truma, and meduma is when chulin produce has got mixed up with the dema truma, and our sages have given this solution. If there was, if the amount of truma was either 1% or less of the total produce, you could lift out 1%, and that would be considered to be truma. And Rabbi Yehuda is saying you could do this even on the Shabbat. You might have thought that this emergency method of taking out one to rectify the rest of the produce, this is a tikkun, and might not be able to be done on the Shabbat. Rabbi Yehuda is saying it's not a complete tikkun because the truma already was truma from before the Shabbat. You cannot separate truma on the Shabbat, but here where the truma was already separated, no matter if the fruit you took out was or was not the original truma, the one you pick out to rectify the rest is considered to be truma, and it is considered that it was truma from the start, and therefore it may be handled on the Shabbat according to Rabbi Yehuda. However, the decision in the halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda. Continuing now with more laws relating to muktzeh. Ho'even she'al pi echovis, the stone that is standing over the mouth of the barrel. Somebody put a stone there, not as a stopper. It was there a stone that is intrinsically muktzeh, and you want to drink from the barrel. You may not on the Shabbat take the stone with your hand. That is called moving of muktzeh. And that is why the Mishnah tells us, mato al tzido, he should tip the barrel on its side that the stone will fall off automatically. So in other words, here, by this method, the person is not having to handle the muktzeh stone itself. And our Mishnah, always looking to possible outcomes of situations, it tells us, if the barrel with a stone was among other barrels, And if he tips the stone off this barrel, it might smash another barrel and he will come to a loss. The Mishnah tells us, Magbia umato al sido. He may lift up the barrel with the stone. Essentially, he wants the contents of the barrel, the wine, not the stone. So he may lift it up and take it out of range of causing danger to the other barrels. And when he gets out of range from the other barrels, he may tip the stone off, as in the first part of the Mishnah, Mato al Sido, he tips the barrel over on its side, Vehinoi feles, the stone falls off. So again, we are learning that where it is necessary to move muktzeh, one should do everything possible not to have to actually move it with one's hands, but to cause it to move by tipping it off. And we have now law in the continuation of our Mishnah relating to coins. Mo'is she'al akor, if you had coins on your pillow, and the coins are muktzeh, you don't want to sleep on these coins which had found themselves on the pillow. No'er es akar v'hen neuflois. The person may shake the pillow and the coins will fall. So this way again, the coins are muktzeh because coins are not intrinsically usable on the Shabbat, since all buying and selling is forbidden on the Shabbat. And our law here applies where the coins were there by accident. But the commentators point out that if the coins had been placed in a particular place from before the Shabbat, intentionally, if it was on the bed would actually be serving as a basis, l'davar ha'asur. The bed would be consisting as a base for the forbidden item, and you would not intrinsically be allowed to move them on the Shabbat. You would not be, even according to the commentators, be able to shake off the coins from the mattress. Now, Mishnah continues. Oyeso olov lishleshes mekancho besmartut. If there was some piece of soil on the bed, mekancho besmartut, the person could use a rag to clean it off. Here, we've been talking about the bed, and we're talking about this in relation to muktzeh. We're now shifting into another area of the halacha, impinging on laundering and washing on the Shabbat. Now, where there was some lishleshes, which is some kind of soiling item, be it spittle or some kind of a child's excrement or whatever it may be, you cannot launder on the Shabbat. Laundering comes under the category of the prohibition against libun, which is one of the 39 forbidden labors on the Shabbat. Libun, that is whitening and bleaching the wool in preparation for dyeing the wool with colors, and any kind of laundering on the Shabbat is considered to be a violation of the prohibition against kibus, the laundering of the libun, the whitening of the wool. But here, where the Mishnah permits the wiping off of some soil from the surface of the bed, which you do not want to sleep on, it could be done with a rag, in other words, a surface cleaning. Now, if the surface was of leather, one may put upon this piece of soil water until it disappears. So here, when it comes to some kind of soil that has gotten onto the bedding, it may be cleaned from the surface with a rag. If it was leather, leather is not considered to be susceptible to laundering in the way that fabric is. Libun relates to fibers of wool, the whitening, the bleaching of the wool. But in the case of leather, it is permitted to pour the water over it. It would not be permitted to rub and scrub the leather even on itself to get off the dirt on the Shabbat, because that would be a very weekday way of doing things. We're now continuing with issues relating to muktzeh. In the third Mishnah, we have a machloket, a division of opinion between Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel about what to do with the leftovers from one's meal on the table. Presumption being that it may well be that on the Shabbat table after the meal there will be the bones of the meat or the chicken or the fish. There could be peelings, and some of these foods might be edible to animals, some of them may be inedible. And where the foods are where the waste is of no further use to either humans or animals on the Shabbat, then intrinsically that waste, like the inedible shells of certain nuts, for example, even though they might be usable for burning after the Shabbat, they cannot be consumed on the Shabbat, and therefore they are muktzeh on the Shabbat. Whereas items that are left that might be edible, be it to the domestic animals or the poultry, these may be moved. So we shall study our Mishnah according to the way it's presented in our text, although our commentators tell us that this Mishnah got a bit mixed up, and what is represented as the opinion of Bet Shammai is really the position of Bet Hillel, and what is represented as the position of Bet Hillel is really the position of Bet Shammai. In both cases, we're talking about the same issue. Can you or can you not move the bones and the shells off the table after the Shabbat meal? Bet Shammai Oimrim Magbiin Min hashulchon atzomois uklipin. Bet Shammai says you could pick up from the table the bones and the shells. Beis Hillel omrim, Beis Hillel, according to the way our Mishnah is written here, they take a more stringent view. Noitel es hatavlo kulo menero. He'd have to take the whole board of the table and shake it off, because even though the shells and the bones might be animal food, they are considered by the position represented here under the name of Bet Hillel to be muktzeh, and the only way to move them, to clear the table, would be to pick up the board of the table and tip them all off to fall onto the floor. In other words, moving them indirectly. Continuing now with related issues at the meal and relating to matters of muktzeh, ma'avirin milifnei ashulchon peirurin pochis mikazayis. We may move from in front of the table crumbs that are less than the size of an olive. V'seor shelafunin, also the pods of the peas and beans, the seor shel adoshim, the waste that is with the adoshim lentils, mipnei shehu machol behemo, because these are animal foods. Well, now there are two different issues in our Mishnah. The first being the issue of the crumbs, and the second being the issue of the waste of the beans. In the case of the crumbs, our Mishnah specifies that you could move them even if there was less than a kazayis. A kazayis, olive size of bread, is considered something that is edible to man and of importance over one olive size of bread. One has to say the grace after meals, the 3 ordained blessings. Even though it's only crumbs here, we are allowed by hand to move them, even though you might have thought that if they are less than a kazayit, they would be muktzah already on Shabbat, the leftovers of the food. Our Mishnah tells us that one may move them, and everybody agrees on this, one may move them on the Shabbat by hand because we have a great honor to our food, and we discreetly, even the bread that is left that we will not eat, we modestly put aside. Now, when it comes to the waste of the beans and the lentils, what is human waste may be edible by the animals, and for that reason, if it is animal food and edible by animals, then it is not in the category of muktzah. It may be moved on the Shabbat. Well, the law is with the leavings on our tables after our meal, that is for the sake of having a nice clean table after the meal, it is permitted to shift off the leavings of the crumbs and bones and shells and the like on the table, peelings, and preferable to do it with some instrument like a brush to brush them off into a pan. And as regards the question of whether they may be shifted and moved around on the Shabbat by hand, then it's preferable to put something that may be moved with the muktzah, to move the plate with the leavings together with something that is still edible. So now coming to the continuation of the third Mishnah, speaking now about still cleaning, whether it's of the table or any other surface, but moving into laws relating to other aspects of prohibitions on the Shabbat. The very interesting case of the sfog, the sponge, a sponge that absorbs water and might be used to mop up water or to squeeze water out of it, involves many questions. Let's follow the words of the Mishnah first. Sfog, sponge. Im yesh lo oir beis achizo. If it had some kind of leather handle, so that when you move the sponge, you will not be having to squeeze the sponge as you move it, so that water absorbed will be squeezed out. When it does have this handle that itself is not absorbent because it's made of leather, mekanchin boy, you may clean off the table with that sponge. Ve'im lav ein mekanchin boy. If it does not have a handle, you may not clean with it, because if it absorbed water, the moment you pick it up and apply some pressure, the water will be squeezed out, and the squeezing out of water from something that the water had been absorbed into is forbidden under the category of schita, squeezing, which is a subcategory of the av melacha, the paradigm forbidden labor of dash, the separation of the wanted kernels from the unwanted stalks. The liquid that is wanted is squeezed out from the unwanted sponge, and that is the separation of the liquid from the sponge that would be caused if the person were to pick up the sponge. And even if that was not his intention, we do not allow him to do something that will bring about the forbidden malacha. That is the opinion of the first Tana. V'chachomim omrim ben koch uven kach nitol b'Shabbos. Ben koch uven koch, either way, whether it did have a handle or did not, nitol b'Shabbos, it could be picked up on the Shabbat, says our commentator of Avanya of Bartanura, if it is dry. The sponge itself is not considered to be in the category of muktzeh. Ve'enoi makabel tumo, nor does a sponge receive ritual impurity. That is to say that a sponge, even if it is a natural sponge that comes out of the sea, the sponge is not considered to be a keli, a utensil of either wood or plant or any other substance that is receiving tum'ah. And for that reason, here in our Mishnah, we have two separate laws. We have the law of picking up the sponge on the Shabbat when it applies to a question of whether water might get squeezed out. It could only be moved on the Shabbat. It would not be muktzah if it is dry. It could be used for cleaning purposes if it was dry, where there's no suspicion that water will be squeezed out. When it comes to the laws of Tumah and Tahara, the sponge is not susceptible to receiving ritual impurity. And with that, we complete chapter 21 of our Mishnah. And with the help of God, we will, in our next session this coming Wednesday, be moving into chapter 22 of Mishnah Shabbat. And with that, my dear friends, we here come to the conclusion of our Torah studies for today, Monday. And as I say, we should be meeting again, God willing, on Wednesday. And until then, I wish you bracha and atzlacha from the holy city of Jerusalem.
Sidusu betzafru de Shabbatu ve'azmin bohashtu atiku kadishu nehoira vayishrayvo bekidishu rabu v'chamru tuvu devater da'enafshu Yeshadai lon shifrai v'nechzai v'kurai v'yachzai lon sisrai d'yisamar b'lchi Yeshu